Hello everybody. It is August 11th, 2025 here in the United States of America. Unfortunately, I was actually in the process of recording a video. I made it about 11 minutes in and the video abruptly stopped. Apparently because I had used a bit too much memory on my computer and I was prompted to delete old files, video files, specifically files that I saved from doing the show so I could make more videos. So I felt like I was doing pretty well in that previous video and now it's gone. So I'm redoing this. Cheers. But anyways, what I mentioned first before I move on to the topic at hand is that, as I mentioned in my previous video about the deal that I had speculated the Russians were willing to take, it seems like I was correct. The Russians are willing to freeze the line of contact at Zaporizhia and in Kherson and actually sign up to a ceasefire so long as the Ukrainians withdraw from the remaining 40% of the Donbass and the less than 5% of Luhansk that they still hold on to. And then, depending on whether or not Ukraine accepts this, Russia is willing to, which I'm sure there's some other conditions as well, but as far as territorial concessions, this is what Russia's position clearly is, and this seems to be something that the United States has also agreed to. Now, I'll wait until the meeting between President Trump and President Putin happens on Friday in Alaska before I make any further videos on the matter, but I would suspect that the Russians are on the verge of major military moves in the Donbass to clearly indicate to the Ukrainians that holding on to this piece of land is futile. Although it is home to some of the most extensive fortifications that they have, they seem to not be able to hold them. And I think the Russians want to make it clear to the Ukrainian government that this is their demand and that not giving into it is futile and will simply waste the lives, more lives of Ukrainian soldiers. And the Russians have actually made a 17-kilometer breakthrough north of Pokrovsk and seem to be in the process of encircling the city, and that is yet another major settlement within the Donbass that has fallen. Konstantinivka also is close to being at least operationally encircled. And then all that remains are two other fairly large settlements. It's not Severodonetsk. Lysychansk, I believe, is the name of one of them. Or I could be wrong, actually. My apologies. I forgot what they were in the original video. Sometimes it gets a little difficult to remember all the names of these different Eastern European settlements that have been involved in this conflict. But I think the Russians are going to make a military statement, a definitive one, over the next few days, and make it clear to the Ukrainians that it's in their best interest to retreat from the Donbass and to accept Russia's terms in regards to accepting a ceasefire. But again, we'll see how the meeting goes between President Trump and President Putin, and then I will revisit the issue, see what kinds of decisions they make and what their positions are in regards to ending this conflict and how the Europeans react in the Ukrainian government. But what I did want to talk about in this video, first and foremost, is President Trump's initiative to clean up D.C. and why I think it's very important to for any civilization or nation to have a clean, vibrant capital city that is a very inspires awe and wonder. That it's a cultural center. It's a cultural and historic center, and it's not just one section of the city. I think people look at D.C. and they the mall and the Washington Monument, the Capitol Building, the U.S. Supreme Court, the Lincoln Memorial, Jefferson Memorial, White House. Yes, everybody knows that, of course. You go to that part of the DC and it's wonderful, great. It looks fantastic. But then you go outside of that to the rest of DC, and you get to crime-ridden areas. You have graffiti, infrastructure that doesn't look so great. DC is nice until you get to the outer parts of DC, and then well, it's not so nice, and you would have no idea that it's our nation's capital if you were just dropped there from another country and didn't realize the mall was a few miles away. I think President Trump wants to make D.C. the crown jewel of American civilization, the historical center of the United States of America, and wants to make it a place that the entire country can be proud of. Now, there's a lot of people up in arms over this because he wants to federalize D.C. and possibly use the National Guard to do it, but I think Trump's instincts here are correct. For a civilization to have a healthy sense of itself, to have a healthy culture, part of that is to maintain its infrastructure, to maintain its historical cities, to beautify its important cultural and historical centers, and make them crown jewels, something that it can show off to the world. And I think America's lost sight of that. Many of our cities are falling into decay and disrepair. We're more concerned with social causes and activism and parading our moral superiority around to the rest of the world. We're a little more concerned with those things rather than the aesthetics of our country, what our country looks like, the cohesion of our country, our sense of self, like how healthy our culture is overall, because we associate these things with nationalism. And nationalism since the 60s has been painted as a bad thing across the West, specifically Western Europe, North America, Australia, and any region of the world directly associated with the Commonwealth and Western Europe as a whole. We have developed a sense that those things are bad things. They're not important. They remind people too much of fascism, as if fascists were the only people ever concerned with the aesthetics of their civilization. We're more concerned with having this multicultural melting pot we can show off to the world, rather than we're more concerned with the idea of it rather than what it looks like. If you look at other civilizations, countries, and empires around the planet, they tend to make their capital city their crown jewel, something they can show off to the world. They put a lot of money and time into it to make it beautiful. A lot of tax dollars go in to these major urban centers to make them like centers of history and culture, places that people want to visit from all across the world. And a few prime examples. One definitely would be Moscow. People can say what they want about the rest of Russia, but Moscow is the crown jewel of Russian civilization. Everyone that travels to Moscow says the same thing about it. It's absolutely beautiful. Crime is low. It's a very comfortable city to visit. There's very many historical places to see. Red Square, St. Basil's Cathedral. The city's covered in beautiful churches, architecture, bridges. It really feels like the heart of an old, powerful civilization that's been around for 1,000 years. And the Russians take great pride in making Moscow, and this has happened over the last 20 years or so, into the crown jewel that it is now. Especially now that they've gotten out of the 90s and had a bit of national resurgence. And people can say what they want. Outside of Moscow, there's some places in Russia that are impoverished, infrastructure is not so great. Oh, that's all well and good. The United States has the same issues. As somebody who lives in Appalachia, you can go to a nice city like Pittsburgh, and then you can go 2 hours down the road, down south, and then you'll find some very impoverished areas that look like there's something out of the third world. Now, those people are still good and wonderful people that live there, but you have issues like major industries leaving, societal problems, drug issues, and stuff like that. So, it's the pot calling the kettle black. It's not a very good rebuttal to that. But what the Russians have done is, this has given them a good sense of their cultural health, their history, their national pride. And I think what President Trump is trying to do is trying to revive that in America, because our nation is to, if any nation is to survive and prosper and move into the future, it has to have a healthy sense of itself. It has to look at its own history with a sense of awe and wonder and accomplishment, and not shame and revulsion. And I feel like ever since the 1960s, there's a large chunk of American culture that's careening in that direction, and that's a poison pill to any civilization. Yeah, sure, any nation can work on its shortcomings and its faults, but when it begins to hate itself, hate its own history, neglect its cities, not care about its historical heritage, and then at that point things began to fall apart. And I suspect there's quite a few Americans that, while they might say, let's tear the whole system down and rebuild something new, well, if that system comes crashing down, I think they'd be absolutely horrified by the results and would do anything that they could to hop in a time machine, rewind a few years, and prevent this from happening in the first place. And his approach might be heavy-handed, but again, this has to do with this initiative within the Trump administration to give America back its sense of cultural pride. Building this monument, park of heroes that President Trump spoke of cleaning up our cities, taking initiatives to again, make D.C. a place that people would really want to visit. That's not dirty and covered with graffiti in some places. I think President Trump looks at the capital cities of other countries, places like Berlin and Rome and whatnot, and they'll look at D.C. and the sad state of D.C. And I'm not saying Paris and Rome don't have issues too; they do as well. But again, when people think of Washington D.C. and even a lot of Americans, they said outside of the mall, it sucks. It's not a good place to visit, and it's not a place people really want to go. Not a place that people want to raise their families. Not a place people are desiring to move to. And I think that's a good thing that President Trump wants to beautify the nation's capital and rid it of crime. Again, I think you want to have a healthy civilization, you can't have crime-ridden cities. Now, there's approaches to accomplishing that. Some, depending on the set of circumstances, that might be a bit heavy-handed. That might cause other problems down the road. But to let the crime problem, especially in your nation's capital, fester and get worse and worse and worse, it's a clear indicator of that, of our country's national health. But anyways, that's all I really wanted to talk about in this video. I didn't want to make it too long. Pretty tired today. I had a long day at work, and I just kind of want to relax. But I'll be back Wednesday with another video, and then, as I mentioned before, I'm going to wait to see how the Russia, the summit between President Trump and President Putin actually goes, and then I'll probably make some more videos about that. But until then, everybody have a good one.